Thanks for giving up your highly serviceable Saturday morning to come and listen to me talk about my favourite subject for the next 3 hours. There's a lot of material that we need to cover. The programme is designed to be a practical guide. In addition to the material that you've got in your packs, and I'm going to take you through orally this morning, we do have this website called HongKongVisaHandbook.com, and everything that you need to turn what is sort of theoretical know-how contained in your material today is all contained on the website, with templates, access to the forms, screencasts on how to complete those forms, a checklist of requirements, how you actually go about submitting applications and managing applications, and then there's a whole series of case studies and narrative that should really give you as close to a definitive practical guide as you could sort of really hope to expect for, given the nature of this material. So let's go through. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, the way it works in Hong Kong is that you apply for a particular visa type depending on the rationale that's bringing you to Hong Kong. And so those rationales are reflected in the various materials that go to each of the visa types. So we've got the visa that speaks to special talent, visa that speaks to family reunion, the visa that's available for visitors to Hong Kong, employment visas, what ultimately goes on to be permanent residency, or some of the immigration stati just short of permanent residency after you've lived here for a minimum of 7 years, the training visa, a visa if you are an entrepreneur wishing to invest in a business in Hong Kong, and also the process of appealing a refused visa application. So in very broad terms, this is the material that we're going to be covering this morning. Okay, so I've been doing this for 25 years, and incrementally over the years things I would say have changed very slowly. If you look at the application of the general employment policy, which governs the issue of employment visas to non-Chinese nationals who want to come and work in Hong Kong, if you look at the history of the general employment policy, essentially over the 25 years that I've been practicing this stuff, there's been barely any change. However, last year, in April 2016, the Audit Commission released a report having looked at the performance of the Immigration Department between 2006 and 2015 in relation to foreign nationals, talents, entrepreneurs and professionals. And it's fair to say that the results of the Audit Commission report represented something akin to a sort of an earthquake under the foundations of Immigration Tower. So since then, the Immigration Department have been slowly implementing the changes which the government immediately accepted the recommendations for in the wake of the Audit Commission report. And essentially what's going on is that over the last 12, 14, 15 months, every single month I'm learning something a little bit new about the way that the Immigration Department are presently working on their duties, if you will. So what do we know about the process of getting an application now that getting an application approved, now that the Audit Commission's sort of recommendations are incrementally getting introduced into the way that the Immigration Department practice what they do? So my experience has been that historically it was kind of the Immigration Department were kind of relatively easygoing. They were not overly legalistic or too bureaucratic. I think now that the easy ride is well and truly over. My experience has been that immigration applicants tend to completely underestimate the amount of time that it takes to get an application through the process and the kind of documentation requirements that are needed to be successful in that. And because they underestimate all of this, usually they wait to the very last moment before they've got their ducks lined up before you can progress an application. And really this is not too good, because most applicants, their employers, approach this with a sort of a sense of entitlement for approval, not really understanding what it takes to get approved, and that then clearly sort of missets expectations, both in terms of the process, in terms of the requirement, and the amount of time that it takes to get these applications approved. And so the process that the Immigration Department go through is a sort of a super heightened approach that they're taking, given that the Immigration Department always give due consideration to the applications once they've got all the documents in hand. So these are the kind of changes that you can sort of experience in your own practice of this material. Applications must be complete at the point of submission, which allows the Immigration Department to work towards meeting their performance criteria of essentially finalising 90% of all cases within the 4 weeks pledge time. So if you look at the Immigration Department's website, universally they cite 4 weeks to get the visa, or at least complete the processing upon receipt of all the documentation. Of course, what happens is that if you don't have all your documentation complete at the point of submission, it means that the Immigration Department are going to engage in correspondence with you. And now that they engage in correspondence with you, that's automatically going to add another 2 weeks to the process as a minimum. And how this works is you'll file your application, you have an expectation of a 4-week case consideration time frame. The immigration officer tasked with this particular application might pick up the bundle out of the system at about 3 or 3.5 weeks. He'll maybe give 3 or 4 hours due consideration to the application. Then he realises that he needs to have further and better particulars, so then he's going to write to the applicant. At the point of writing to the applicant, there goes your extra 2 weeks straight away, because now the Immigration Department cite a second submission date 2 weeks out. And even if you were to submit all the documents the very next day after you receive the request, they're not going to pick the file up again and do any kind of work on it until the delivered by date has actually been passed. So at that point then, the Immigration Department have got potentially another 4 weeks to be able to give due consideration to the file, because now they've got everything that they need. What this means is that the vast majority of cases, unless they're slam dunk, where the officer can approve the application at the point of first examination, you're looking really at a minimum of a 6, more likely 8, potentially up to 10 weeks for the application to be complete. So it used to be that the Immigration Department were quite happy just to receive the very, very basic set of documents, you could then backfill what you needed if you needed a bit of time to bring other documents into play. Now the Immigration Department are frowning upon this approach, and so whilst in emergency circumstances the Immigration Department have been flexible and have been prepared to receive a skeleton submission initially just to get the application in the system and a file reference number flowing, in the main they frown upon applications that are not really there to be completed upon first examination. So the practical consequences for applicants in this case is just pre-warn them that it's going to take longer than they could possibly imagine. And I always say to clients, by the time you've kind of made the decision that you want to have this person deployed in Hong Kong, say for employment purposes, and by the time they've got the activated visa endorsed in their passport with their Hong Kong identity card in hand, advise people it's going to be a 90-day process. It's a 3-month process from beginning to end. So if you can do that, then you'll make sure that your client's expectations are being properly set as to exactly how long this process is going to take. Anything shorter than that, of course, is a bonus, and you look like a hero because you've been able to deliver so quickly. But the reality is it does take some time. Okay, so major change number 2. Allegedly, the Immigration Department are issuing guidelines to set out clearly the required procedures considering the availability of local employees and market-level remuneration in processing employment and mainland talents and professionals visas. I haven't seen anything specifically yet that actually drills down on what they said they were going to do, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. But for the moment, I haven't seen anything presented on the Immigration Department's website that would represent the next level of detail predicated on what the Audit Commission had to say. There is no doubt that local employee count and the potential for job creation is a key facet in determining whether or not an application, particularly for an employment visa or an admission scheme for mainland talents and professional visa, will require. They were criticised for not really understanding how the decision making that we were going through in relation to mainland talents and professionals under the general employment policy, how granting those visas was going to add wider value to Hong Kong. There was a determination to ensure that before a job offer is expanded to a foreign national for an employment visa, or indeed for a mainland talents and professional visa, that the local labour market be proven to have been tested unsuccessfully for a local candidate. And I'm saying 80% of the cases, we're advising clients now that you really should go through a process of being able to show to the Immigration Department that genuine efforts to find a local candidate for the particular role have been expended in about 80% of the cases. 20% of the cases, it's obvious that no local person is going to be able to do that job, so there's no requirement to demonstrate to the Immigration Department you've tested the local labour market. But in 80% of cases now, it's fair to say that I'm telling clients, yes, before we file this application, even though you've chosen your candidate and that you believe this person is the right person, let's at least say to the Immigration Department, here's all the stuff that we've done to try and address the fact that we should be protecting local jobs first. Even though it may be completely unrealistic to expect to find this talent locally, let's at the very least allow the Immigration Department to tick that box when they go through the case consideration process. So yeah, the practical consequence for applicants is that they need to steel themselves for significant scrutiny as to rates of pay and indeed where the local labour market has been tested. All these details, of course, at the next level of detail are contained in your pack. So major change number 3, they are now increasingly looking both at the quality of the documents that you're putting in at first submission and then following up on a sort of a random audit type basis where they will make separate investigations into the veracity of the documents that have been put in support of a particular application, insofar as, you know, what's contained on somebody's CV or what qualifications they're claiming to have. And then this was, as I say, really pointed out in the Audit Commission in terms of how the immigration arrangements for non-local graduates program, which I'll come to, how that was administered, but we're seeing it more widely applied throughout both the admission scheme for mainland talents and professionals and also under the general employment policy where you're getting an employment visa for a non-Chinese national. And there's no reason why the Immigration Department shouldn't do that, and we're now seeing essentially every, for example, document that's submitted in a non-English or Chinese language needs to be certified translated. A couple of years ago, certified translations were not routinely needed. You could self-translate and then just sign off and certify it yourself. These days, the Immigration Department are not accepting that. So practical consequence for the applicant is that all the documents supporting the prior employment and the education qualifications claimed are being more rigorously assessed, with the secondary authentication through sort of random audit checks now being in play as well. So just anticipate that practically what this means in these particular visa cases, that, you know, there's some more expense and a little bit more time that's required to bring the document quality up to snuff, so that the Immigration Department is satisfied with how the document is that they are working with. Okay, so another major change number 4, is that presently the Immigration Department are still availing benefits to qualified individuals who are presently working for a group company or associate company overseas that are being transferred into Hong Kong as an intercompany transferee. They've always been ready to look at these applications with a positive set of eyes, because clearly no local person can be expected to take up work where there's been a commercial decision to transfer an executive from one group company to the associated company in Hong Kong. But now the Immigration Department are calling for a minimum of 12 months prior employment before they will avail the sort of the benefits to accrue in those types of applications. So yeah, here we have to show 12 months prior employment, and this then in a sense sort of works to limit the flexibility, especially if there is a determination to transfer somebody in Hong Kong on short notice from a group company overseas. If they haven't had a prior 12 months employment, it just means, all things considered, if the quality of the applicant is sufficiently robust enough, it just means that it'll take a little bit extra time and a little bit more justification in your argument as to, you know, why this particular person is favoured as rather a local person, given that we don't have the 12-month prior employment just to sort of snap them into the intercompany transferee model, if you will. So that's another adjustment as a result of the Audit Commission. And then turning to business investment as an entrepreneur, similarly we're seeing as much documentation in one place as you can possibly muster at the point of submission to try and make the processes as speedy as you possibly can, but the Immigration Department are still engaging in correspondence and they're still prepared to go through that process. They're not, in my experience, practically turning these cases away at the point of submission and saying, no, we've done a very, very brief assessment at this point and we don't want to take these papers from you. They are actually receiving the applications and then they're engaging in the follow-up correspondence to build the file up over time accordingly. And this is particularly in the case of individual applicants who are residents today. They've got an employment visa, for example, and they're seeking to change their visa category from an employment visa through to business investment as an entrepreneur. Okay, carrying on with business investors. So business review. Now this has become a very big issue. When you look at the Immigration Department's visa grant policy under this particular visa type, the entrepreneur visa, stated policy is to, upon approval, grant a 2-year limit of stay initially, and then a 3-year limit of stay, and then a 3-year limit of stay. However, because of the recommendations for change, the Immigration Department have kind of been squeezed into a corner somewhat. So what they're doing now is if they think that the application at the point of approval is a little bit weak, slightly marginal, they'll still grant the approval, but they won't give you 2 years, they'll give you 1 year, and then they will assess where you are at the end of that first year under a review of the business to determine exactly how well you fared in that first 12 months, and that will then determine the length of your next extension after completion of that business review. So now this means that the Immigration Department have got higher expectations of applicants to deliver on the contribution to the economy of Hong Kong that's required for the visa, because as you'll come to understand, when you get an entrepreneur visa, essentially what you're doing is you're saying to the Immigration Department, this is our plan, this is what we want to do, this is the contribution to the economy of Hong Kong that will accrue. And that in a sense is a kind of like it's an act of faith on the Immigration Department that you're going to deliver on that business plan. So if they give you a 2-year visa after having given you the approval, then essentially you've got 2 years to be able to deliver on that plan. And it might well be, given that no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy, having a 2-year limit of stay rather than a 1-year limit of stay kind of gives you the time in business to sort of build up to the point where you can say the materialization of your business plan has been sufficiently complete that the Immigration Department will be satisfied to give you the extension of stay that you need. But if you only get a 12-month limit of stay, it means you've really got to action all the operating elements of the plan, such as you'll see creation of local jobs, properly set up office, having the requisite sort of commercial resources and funding resources available to you, so that at the end of that first 12 months when you come up for review, you're going to stand a good chance of getting a 2-year limit of stay thereafter. But anyway, what it means for applicants who've been successful and have only got a 1-year limit of stay, they've now only got 12 months to kind of prove to the Immigration Department that the materialization of their plan is benefiting Hong Kong in the way that the Immigration Department expect to see. Okay, so practical consequences. If there is an application for an extension of stay and there haven't been any local jobs created, there's a very real possibility that the visa extension may not be available, or if it is available, it might be available for just a 6-month probationary extension rather than a 1-year extension, or you probably 70-80% of the time, if you haven't got a job, a local job created, and you haven't created any local jobs in that first 12 months, you'd probably get a 1-year extension of stay, and the immigration department would expect you to revise your business plan and put forward to them that revised business plan that speaks to what's going to happen over the course of the next 12 months. So there have been significant tightening up in terms of how entrepreneur visa extensions of stays are processed as a result of the Audit Commission. So those are the big sort of operational changes that have accrued as a result of the Audit Commission report.